Dear alcohol, when did you make your first appearance known to me? When did you make your presence known to me? As far as I remember in my teens, there was only the occasional Christmas snowball. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, and we're going back to the 70s, okay? A snowball was a mix of advocat liqueur. It was a kind of egg liqueur and mixed with lemonade. It was most delicious. And it looked like this ball of yellow. It was lovely. Either that or a baby sham or Spanish sauterne. So those were the drinks that were surrounding me with the adults in the room during those years, the early years. But it wasn't like they were all falling down, getting drunk around me. This was maybe just a Christmas or New Year in Scotland, because that's what we celebrate more than Christmas, actually. And of course, being in Scotland, the adults would be having some whiskey and the men some beers. So those were the drinks. But from the age of 16 or 17, I was underage drinking, I can definitely say, in Edinburgh's pubs. My steady boyfriend was 4 years older. So that's quite an age difference when you're a teenager. So if I was 16, he was going to be 20 and he was at university. And the pub evenings on the weekends where we met our friends, I would be drinking Cinzano lemonade and vodka lime. But it wasn't for the buzz or anything like that. It was just for the flavor, really, and just having something to drink with them in their circle. The licensing hours in Scotland in those days, my goodness me, folks, as I said, the mid 70s, they really induced a trend of binge drinking. Pubs were open from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., lunchtime, and then again from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Now, they were closing earlier in Scotland than in England in those days. Last orders were called at 9:45, hastily followed by the stampede to the bar, where double orders would be taken on trays back to your table. Panic stations. Let's drink up as fast as we can. And I also worked in a pub at lunchtime during the school holidays. Yes, I was still underage, but the manager didn't seem to mind, and I looked good in those days. So there I was behind the bar. I really enjoyed it, actually. But still wasn't drinking much. And I always hated this Sunday morning evidence of those who had drunk too much. It's still to this day, the streets of Edinburgh on a Sunday morning are not a pretty sight. Funnily enough, on my 18th birthday, I took myself off to celebrate my legal drinking age. And I ordered a scotch on the rocks, very sophisticated, which I must admit tasted pretty awful. It was this kind of graduation for me. I had graduated and earned it. So what does that say? Really bad. So that was the Scottish years. The big change came, though, when I moved with that boyfriend who had been upgraded to a fiance now. I moved to South Africa in 1976. Now, that was a pretty hot year politically in this country, but I was only 20 and I just went with the flow. At the beginning, we lived with his parents in Benoni near Johannesburg. And for me, it was such a step up in lifestyle, a beautiful house with a swimming pool, tennis court, I think there was as well, endless days of sunshine, an easy receptionist job at a local company, and fun weekends in the discos of Hillbrow, the cosmopolitan heart of, at that time, apartheid South Africa. As I said, I wasn't put off by the politics of the time. Unfortunately, I just accepted it for what it was. I wasn't the activist that I am nowadays. But that time in Benoni was the beginning of increased alcohol consumption, gins and tonics and wine at the weekend barbecues, and also confrontation within the household with my fiance's mother, who was an alcoholic. His father was also a heavy drinker, but she was definitely in trouble. I had seen a glimpse of this already 4 years prior on a family holiday in Turkey, but the South African lifestyle had fueled her dependence to new lows. There were violent domestic scenes, broken bottles, and then off she would go to work on a Monday morning with a bottle of Smirnoff in her bag, none the worse for it all. So the next big change came for me about a year later when I split up with the fiance and met the man who would become my first husband. He was a blonde, blue-eyed Adonis from Germany who swept me off my feet and into his arms, and elsewhere, of course. My silly little self at the time was so impressed by the bottle of champagne he had in the fridge at the seduction scene. It felt so glamorous and sophisticated, and it served to lay the foundation stone to our relationship. His knowledge of wine was just as impressive, and I remember going to a wine shop with him where he bought 6 bottles. Wow, 6 bottles at once. I thought we must be starting a cellar. This is interesting. We'll be putting them away, maybe. It's an investment. That was my naive thought. Anyway, the white wines were duly put in the fridge and the reds were on the counter in the kitchen, and it was all finished within a couple of days, I think. My body noticed the change in the diet immediately, but the sensation and lust it fueled with the relationship was second to none. It's funny, I can't remember hangovers at that time. And we got married a year later in 1978, and the wedding reception was in our small flat, and it was more or less a glorified wine and cheese party with a wedding cake in the middle of it. My mother flew out from Scotland, and my new husband went a little bit overboard with the purchasing of the drinks for this small wedding reception. I remember the bath was full of the bottles of champagne, production champagne. Anyway, we were well stocked for months to come. Clever man, I thought at the time, but it was just another indication of his own dependence on it. He justified his heavy wine intake by saying that he had done it in Paris, where he'd worked for several years, and it was a lifestyle thing. His job as hotel manager was the first-class enabler of his addiction. He would be entertaining guests on a regular basis, and that was just part of the job. So he could drink at work. So that was the early married years in South Africa, and we then moved to Germany. And during the 80s, it really saw him drinking himself to oblivion, but hiding the stash so well that I really had no idea about the extent of the problem. He would be bringing back 3-liter flagons of white wine in the mornings. Licensing hours in Germany were very different from Scottish hours. So you could actually go to a supermarket and purchase these huge bottles of clonk. And he would bring it home. He would then decant this 3-liter flagon and get the evidence down into the rubbish chute flats quickly. And he would store the bottles that he put it into. But he'd work himself through those bottles before I came home from work that day. He was really drinking a lot, but he was never drunk. So we eventually split up in 1988, and I moved to Chicago. Now, at that time, again, surrounded by the stuff. It was happy hour. It was 2-for-1s. It was all the rage. And bars and nightclubs were opening everywhere there. You received invitations to go along there with 20 of your friends. Possibly the same thing was happening in the UK at the time, I don't know. But you had this free party, and they wanted to populate the places, rent a crowd, basically. We got free drinks, and then snack buffets were added as well. So after work, 5 o'clock, 5:30, I'd go to any of the bars and have a couple of glasses of 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐿. That was the go-to drink there, and accompanied by the snacks. And that would be supper, really. Long-stemmed glasses made me feel sophisticated and happy. So meanwhile, back in Bonnie, Scotland, my mother had taken to the bottle with gusto, which was a really bad idea because she was mixing it with the antidepressants that she had been on for many years. She had a nervous bipolar probably situation from very young in her life. And she'd been on antidepressants and even worse, electrical convulsive therapy, ECT, beforehand. So this combination with alcohol was really bad. And she became very argumentative, and she would call me in the middle of the night to tell me all her woes and frustrations, take them out on me. violent dramas and domestic situations were happening in Scotland at that time with her brothers, and everything fueled on all sides by alcohol. So it wasn't until I returned to Germany after Chicago, a single person, that I started drinking alone. I would have half to 3/4 of a bottle of wine, mostly white wine, in the evenings with my dinner. I was starting to not feel so great in the mornings, but it passed quickly. I was mid to late 30s by this time. And an overindulgence sometimes led to one night stands that I would regret and feel guilt-ridden about, reckless behavior, etc., dangerous times as well. Then I returned to South Africa in 1996, and the drinking took on new dimensions. We'd often get a bottle of wine to drink after hours at the office. So come 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I'd go downstairs to the bottle store and get a bottle of white wine, and we would open it in the office. It was a small company. There were about 4 of us sharing it. So it was just a glass. Then we'd go on to dinner afterwards, probably, and continue drinking there. Or I would go home, but on the way home, I would stop off at my favorite bistro, have something to eat, and probably 2 big glassfuls. The wines that they serve by the glass is not what you would pour from a bottle, full up to the top. Then the weekend drinking, that would often start at lunchtime. I was single, enjoying my career, and felt that I had a really good life. And I did in many ways. I had known my second husband, Richard, through work for a few years already, but we started a relationship, a long distance relationship, because he was in Cape Town and I was in Johannesburg. And that culminated in me moving to Cape Town in 2002 to live with him in a cottage which we rented while building our house here. And these were the happiest times of my life, really. He was the love of my life. And yes, we both drank quite a lot. It didn't affect him badly, though. It didn't affect his mood or his emotions or personality, it seemed. But I was finding it increasingly difficult to find the stop button, and would turn either aggressive or maudlin, that word, depressed and down in the dumps. Here it's called 𝐿𝐵𝐷𝑟𝑒𝑒𝑒𝑒𝑡, which translates to drunk and remorseful. Very apt. Always the guilt. And then the start of the realization that this is not a good thing that's happening. It was obvious. You've got this diary. My first entry in 2017 in here was too much, enough, after a wine estate visit. And the routine and the creeping dependency was increasing. I would notice at social gatherings that I was always ahead of most other people at the table in my consumption. And I was worried that it would be noticeable, that it was always me that needed my glass topping up first. So daily drinking was the norm, often up to a bottle, and sometimes at weekends more. In May of 2018, now this is the turning point, I attended my first alcohol-related workshop, and that was facilitated by our illustrious leader here, Janet, and I loved it. I stopped drinking that day. I took the challenge of 100 days, and I stuck to it like glue, even for longer. Headaches abounded. I'm quite headache prone anyway, at first and during the detox stage. And I tried alcohol-free wines, but hated them. I'd naively thought, oh, wonderful, we'll have an alcohol-free wine and my favorite French cheese, and life will just continue perfectly. I just won't be having the alcohol. The wines were horrible. Maybe there are some that are nice, but I've never found one. But anyway, I felt strong. That was it. I felt great. And the best part of it was that I felt I was in control. And of course, the forever word, though, wasn't part of the vocabulary. This was just counting the days, sticking to it. I've got the calendar here. Day 33, 1/3 there. So the end was in sight, yes, but it was going to be the end of this 100 days, right? Day 34, determined. That's good. So that must have been a little bit of a problem that day. Day 35, strong. Day 36, strong but craving things. And day 37 was have 4 meals today, including carrot cake and coffee, eating like a horse. So there we go. I carried on. The 100 days was fine. And at 105 days, I decided I would drink on occasion. So this was just the best wines and the best crystal glasses, and only with special people as well. Moderation Mary had made herself known. There she was. And I embraced her and we hugged. We were buddies. But why was I so obsessed with trying to control it? When were the occasions? It was an occasion. How did I decide which wines were the best? Was it the most expensive ones, or what was it? The daily entries following on from day 105 are also very telling, because here I was now listing how much I drank. So 1 glass of Sauvignon Blanc, 1.5 glasses, 1 glass, AFD, AFD, alcohol-free day, great initials. And all this work I was putting into this, it just bears witness to the effort that Moderation Mary demands of us. And eventually, of course, it was a solid attitude, and daily drinking took over, in cheap glasses, I might add. Additional diary notes mention the words low, as in not feeling good, and the depressive state was setting in noticeably. But at this stage, I am 62 years of age. By October of that year, I was drinking full time, back to square one, and the hangovers were monumental and forced an alcohol-free day, sometimes 2 or 3 even. So the pattern was set. Drinking day, hangover day, and so on. And I'm sure also that the sulfites in the wine played a huge role in the headaches. I used to tell my friends even that I have an allergy. They laugh to this day. Yes, Fran, an allergy. Anyway, the hangovers were different from other alcohol. So in 2019, back to the diary, there I was measuring everything, all these entries, really. Mary and I were still buddies. I can do this. And everyone knows how this is going to pan out. The rest of that year, this is 2019, was marred by my husband's, Richard's, terminal illness, which culminated in his death in December. And the lead up during that time saw me using wine as an aid to move into a different space, just to be away from the caring part for a while, just to be away from the downward spiral that he was on physically. I needed some time out. And of course, wine was there, a friend. I knew it wasn't the answer, and I have regrets that I wasn't the person I am now, the more emotionally balanced person, less anxious, less moody, less depressed, less just emotional with him. And I probably could have been a better wife and a better carer. It was hard, but I have to say, I'm looking back, and now I'm looking forward. This is a bit of the letter where, gosh, you stop for a while and start another paragraph eventually, but you think, oh yes, should have, could have, would have. So there I am. The next attempt to control the drinking was in June of 2021, and that was the 66-day challenge, because that was the neural pathway thing, 66 days. Yeah, that'll sort it. Once again, it worked like a charm. I was in control again. I loved it. I was happy. But I still wasn't thinking about the F word, the F for forever word. Just another recalibration. And the alcohol bans during COVID. Now, remember, in South Africa, we had a kind of prohibition situation here. The president locked us down so much that he locked us out of any alcohol sales. Of course, there was black market, but the prices were ridiculous. And remember, I'm from Scotland. I had a wine cellar, though. I didn't have my wine cellar that I dreamt about all those years ago. And I had enough wine in there to see me through the lockdowns, COVID times. And I took to solo drinking, of course. What else were we doing at that time? We weren't socializing. It was my cat, there he is, my wine and me, and was my world. So the slippery slope was taking over, but was it a rock bottom? Did I have a rock bottom? Was there one day? I think there were many days actually, which I did not recognize at the time. I think it was more a case of slow sinking sand, making excuses, pulling the wool over my eyes. But there was one shocking evening in January of 2022. And I can remember that we had a neighborhood block party, which we never had before, haven't had since actually. But anyway, it was a lovely evening outside with the neighbors. And one of them actually has his own home distillery. So there was whiskey going, and I glugged this stuff down like it was going out of fashion. And that neighbor helped me home. He helped me home up about 10 or 12 steps to my house, and that was fine. Once I closed the door, though, went to the bathroom, I fell down and I collapsed and I felt I couldn't get up. And this had never happened before. I physically couldn't coordinate myself. So I crawled to the bedroom and can't remember the rest, passed out, and had the hangover, the mother of all hangovers, the next day. So I think that probably was my rock bottom. So this wine witch this time had masqueraded as a whiskey witch. But it still took me until July of that year, July the 28th, before I finally irrevocably got it. And it was when I was with my stepdaughter and her partner. We were at my little place in the country, and I had felt so sad after the wine I was drinking with them. I woke up that morning and I finally said to myself, I've had it. This is enough of being sad and being artificially sad, really. This mood, no, absolutely not. No more. So I didn't say anything to them, didn't announce it to anybody. But there was a boot camp just round the corner. So I think I was 2 or 3 days sober by the time I started. And I did the 5-day boot camp, loved it. And I carried on with the Breaking Free program thereafter. And it was different than just these 100 days or 66 days. Even with the help that had been available during that time, this was next level. This was the module, the masterclass, the best tools and support ever. I loved it. And I was steering the ship again. I was in control again. But I had all this support. And I was taking it one day at a time, embracing it, accepting it, being honest with myself, getting excited, the whys, everything about it was just great. I was investing in it full time. And I was luckier maybe than some of us because I had no distractions. I had no children pulling at my skirt. I had no husband drinking next to me and wondering why I was doing this. Also, I'm semi-retired, so I've got flexible working hours. I didn't have the stress of having to go to work at this particular time. I was very lucky. And I could give this project my undivided attention and I could make it my job. And maybe it had to come to this stage that the lack of distractions, the simplicity of my life at that time were exactly what I needed to accomplish the feat at hand. I had no excuses not to do this properly. I was just taking a day at a time. The forever word I wasn't even thinking of, but it was every day. And I was being re-educated, and not just the podcasts, which are fantastic in themselves, but of course, the books. This one, we all know this one, and TED Talks, Claire Pooley's TED Talk, I loved. I loved the Huberman Lab podcasts about just what we're doing to our brains, the neurological dangers. That scared me to death, actually. We always think about the danger to our livers. And I think that's the least of it. That's the tip of the iceberg. But the brain, it's far worse without any symptoms, really. Okay, we're going to forget things. We're having those backup bits and pieces, but we don't really know what's going on in there. all of that. And above all, though, the gentle, kind approach, I think, by Tribe Sober, like the great people that we meet on this journey and the non-judgmental environment that is being provided and created. Tribe Sober leaders are just an incredible group of people. But aside from Tribe Sober, very important, and fortunately, I'm in a physically good enough shape to do it, is physical exercise. I can't stress it enough. And I think really one can always do something, and doing something is better than absolutely nothing. Yoga, very passive, but actually really good for strength exercises. I go to a yoga class once a week, sometimes twice a week. Could probably do more to get on the mat on my own, but I need to go to a class. I need that guidance. But my best of all thing is park run. We're celebrating a 1 millionth person today somewhere in South Africa. And that's a 5-kilometer time, but personally timed. It's your own timing. You're not racing against anybody else, just yourself. And that's 5 kilometers that I do every Saturday morning. I love it to bits. Been doing it for 2.5 years now. Started it actually before I stopped drinking. And when I felt bad on a Saturday morning getting up for it, I thought, oh, I'll feel better after the run, which I always did. But it's really not the key, is it? Who was I kidding? The excuses we pile up. I was eating healthily. I thought I was exercising. I was doing a bit of meditation. I wasn't smoking and I wasn't doing drugs. I'm good. So a bit of wine can't be that bad, can it? That one little vice? After stopping, and we can't deny it, there's a possible shift to other cravings. And for me, it was definitely chocolate. And it possibly still is, but I've curbed it now. Sugar, we all know that is a thing. And we know that we must go more for the fruit sugar, being better sugar. Tribe Sober advises us on how to tackle that stage so well in the detoxing process. I think you chase the big bunny, not all of its little babies in that field that they tell us about. Not at the beginning, at least. I'm now at the stage, though, of dealing with those little bunnies, less chocolates, less cheese, more socializing, and reaching a contentedness. It's 2 years and almost 4 months later. Then now the next stage for me is I'm really enjoying being a cheerleader to the newbies, not just the newbies, to everybody else who's following the same path, helping to pick themselves up after tripping on a step or two on that stairway, that image that we have, taking one step at a time. So to get back to the letter to this non-friend, goodbye, alcohol. You were a good friend. But why did you have to take over such a dominant role? It wasn't an equal friendship. You took and I gave. And eventually I gave in and then I gave up. But now I've got everything back again. So good riddance. I lament you not.